This is Polyamory Weekly, tales from the front of responsible non-monogamy from a pansexual, kink-friendly point of view. A warning for our under-18 listeners. This is an adult-oriented podcast about really lascivious things, like communication and honesty in relationships. If you're under 18 and looking for upfront advice and answers to questions about sex, please visit scarletteen.com.
This is Polyamory Weekly, episode 488 for September 22nd, 2016. Coming up on today's show, negotiating metamour introductions. That's coming up on today's show. Hello everyone, I am your host Minx, freshly back from our vacation, just a tad exhausted, but coming at you with some really good content. So I'm just going to dive right back in, and I have switched back to my old recording setup because it's much easier with just one person recording, and you may be able to hear they are doing construction outside my window, so apologize if I'm not able to reduce all the background noise. Something that came across my feed this week that I thought was relevant to our sex-positive listeners is you guys may have heard that Pamela Anderson, former Playboy bunny and model, has taken an anti-porn stance. And the fabulous Tina Horn has written a response to it. What Tina writes is that basically, hey, porn is not a bad thing. Porn is just a type of media that provides a consensual, entertaining way to satisfy sexual curiosity. She writes, "This is why I was so disappointed to read the anti-pornography op-ed written by former Playboy model Pamela Anderson and Rabbi Shmuley Boteach for the Wall Street Journal last week. In the piece, the co-authors agree that porn is, quote, a public hazard of unprecedented seriousness given how freely available, anonymously accessible, and easily disseminated pornography is nowadays. And they use Anthony Weiner as proof. You may recall from a couple of years ago, Anthony Weiner being a congressperson who was caught sexting his pictures of his genitalia to somebody who was not his wife." So Tina continues, "They call names in a racist and childish manner. The children of people who enjoy porn are crack babies. Porn consumers are losers. And maybe worst of all, they not so subtly frame their argument as if gay people, female lovers of porn, and people who have sex for reasons other than procreation do not exist." And then she brings on one of the best resources to talk about sex and sex addiction, Dr. David Ley. He's a clinical psychologist, author of The Myth of Sex Addiction. We've had him here on the show. He has an upcoming book called Ethical Porn for Dicks, which I just can't wait to read. And he says, with porn, it's a very limited usefulness to think of it as a drug. People who have problematic porn or sex behaviors always have other problems. Lack of other coping skills, social isolation, lack of sex education, sexual desires which are socially suppressed, or other personality or psychological issues. He added, blaming these complex issues on porn is just like during the Prohibition era when crime, divorce, mental illness, and other social ills were blamed on alcohol. Porn is the modern scapegoat. Instead of addressing the complicated issues of mature, modern sexual behaviors, it's easier to blame such problems on porn." Well said, indeed, well said. So if you'd like to read the full article by Tina Horn, I'll provide a link in the show notes at polyweekly.com, and she also provides a link back to the original op-ed piece. And in this week's Poly in the News, we got a throwback. It's like we're back in the year 2000, 2005. Alan wrote this great headline, "A Writer's Ignorance on Display and Community Response." And he begins his commentary with these words, "Some writers for mass media still don't have a clue, and when their incompetent editors don't either, this is what you get. UK polyamory members are responding to this item, which appeared in the free public transport paper UK Metro a few days ago. It's called Poly What? Perplexed by the increase in men saying they're, quote, polyamorous, unquote? So is Alice Mann. And the article is just so completely clueless. The writer starts out by saying, hey, when it comes to online dating, I'm hardly a newbie. I've clicked on everything from Match to OkCupid and swiped my way through Tinder, Bumble, and Happen. But then she talks about meeting somebody who says, there's something you should know, I'm kinky and poly. Her response to this is, in other words, he liked kinky sex with many partners. I appreciated his candor and made my excuses, assuming he was an anomaly. Then, a week later, she writes, a man called to arrange a date and dropped into the conversation, are you polyamorous? What? She writes, how has this become a thing? How have we gone from saying, quote, not looking for anything serious, to, quote, polyamorous? Can we just call a spade? If you want to sleep around, all well and good, but can you not label it like it's a medical condition? Now, we used to get this type of article all the time, but again, this was over 10 years ago. When I first started doing Poly Weekly in 2005, this was what most of our coverage was like. But as you've been hearing from the Poly in the News segments over the last 10 years, the coverage has really changed to be more about personal essays, to go more in depth into why people are poly and what poly arrangements look like and how different people make it work in different ways. More of a personal investigative journalism, more of a deep dive, a human interest story, if you will. But her rant seems to come straight out of 2005. I feel like I have to check the date on the paper. So he gives us information on how to contact the Metro Health, Fitness, and Beauty editor, Vicky Marie Kosar. She put the piece up on the Twitter account for the paper. He does note that she seems to sound contrite and promises to forward comments to the editor responsible for running this really badly written, badly researched piece of crap. My words, not hers. But I'll provide a link to this whole throwback debacle on the show notes at polyweekly.com. Today's topic is about metamour introductions. Now, I know that we talk about metamours from time to time, but hey, it's been a few months, so I thought this listener-directed question was not untimely. So, Michelle writes that she has been married to her husband for 10 years, and she actually led the way to poly from swinging, which wasn't satisfying enough for her. She writes, I would really like for us to meet each other's partners as soon in the relationship as possible. I feel that meeting his partners will help to allay my insecurities and fears of the unknown, and I think it's helpful having open communication between metamours. At my urging, my husband has met a couple of my partners in the past, but feels that it's such an uncomfortable experience that he'd rather not meet them at all, and if he must meet them, he wants to delay those meetings for as long as possible. She says, he agrees reluctantly to meet partners and to introduce me to his, but we're not sure how to determine when we should introduce new partners to each other. I feel like I'd rather meet his new partners after no more than 2 or 3 dates, whereas he thinks that seems unnecessarily soon. How do we solve this impasse? How do other poly-open non-mono people decide when it's time to introduce a new partner to their other? Well, I think if you interview 100 different poly people, you will get 100 different answers. So there's definitely not one right answer to this. The only right answer is what works for you. And by you, I mean the plural you, both of you, right? So this is one of those things like everything else in relationships, not just poly relationships, but relationships in general. You start by saying what you want, listen to what the other person wants, and then you negotiate from there. So the basic starter question is, what do you need to be happy and healthy in this relationship? So are you happiest when you can meet his metamours after 2 to 3 dates, and you feel better about your dating when he meets your metamours or your partners after 2 to 3 dates? put that on the table. And then ask him, what does he need to be happy and healthy? 5 dates, 6 dates? It might be worth it also to drill down into the concept of why is it so uncomfortable? Is there a way we can make these meetings more comfortable for you? What would be a treat for him? Steak? Blowjob? I mean, you can do a little reward. If you meet my metamour after just 2 dates instead of 5 dates like you'd prefer, then you get a blowjob. I mean, whatever works for you. The point is that you guys each have your own needs, and it's just like negotiating anything else. Think about when you have sex. Maybe you want to have missionary and he wants to have doggy style. How do you negotiate that, right? Well, maybe you have missionary, then doggy style. Maybe you have doggy style, then missionary. Maybe you alternate. Or maybe you say, well, if you're willing to go down on me, then we can have it doggy style like you do. You figure it out so that each person gives a little and each person is getting what they need to be happy and kind of meet somewhere in the middle. This is a basic negotiation technique that you should be using everywhere in your relationship. I would point out a couple of things, though. Actually, just one thing, I think, is that this might change over time. When you were first starting dating as poly, you might find that you really need to meet the partners right away. And it could very well be that after, another 6 months or a year of this, you get a little better at dating, maybe you slow down a little bit. And then maybe it's, after the first month. So keep in mind that these needs may change over time. Just because you negotiate something right now doesn't mean that it's going to be like that forever and ever, amen, until the end of time. Lusty Guy and I have talked about the fact that what tends to work for us is we give a heads up right away. So if there is somebody on OkCupid or a friend that is passing into the flirt zone, we give that verbal communication right away. Lusty Guy will come to me and say, oh, by the way, there's somebody that's been flirting with me on Facebook. And I'm like, okay, good to know. No date yet, not even talk of a date yet. I don't like being blindsided, so I love it when he tells me these little things. A lot of times nothing comes of them, but I feel in the know. I really hate being blindsided, right? What I don't want to hear is, oh, by the way, I had a date with somebody new last night. And I'm like, what? Whoa, who? Wow, when, where? How did this happen? I just want to be in the know. We don't do veto power or anything like that. But, it's just informed consent is what it comes down to for me. Now, in terms of meeting partners, well, we're kind of a big, happy family. And so we tend to meet the partners fairly soon, like within a couple of dates. Basically, once you know that you've gone on a couple dates, you know that you like the person, it might go somewhere, then, we'll just do like a little dinner, maybe a little movie. We'll do something with the whole poly family so that we can meet. And it's not, you mentioned that your husband is uncomfortable. And here's the thing, it's not a vetting process. It's not like we're sitting here going, are you appropriate to be in our family? It's really just a chance to, as you say, just to become more comfortable and allay fears, just to, hug the real person, find out what they're interested in. I mean, I just treat it like I'm meeting a new friend. I mean, hey, I'm like, are you a mechanic? Are you a doctor? Are you a massage therapist? What do you bring into the polyclave? We are short one massage therapist, so if there are any massage therapists in the Seattle area that want to date us, let me know. Oh, we also do need a mechanic in the family. So there you go. But really, it comes down to what you need to be happy and to keep from going crazy in your dating. If you need for your husband to meet your partners within 2 or 3 dates, and that's what helps you feel secure, then ask for that. If he's really uncomfortable, you can help find ways, see if you can figure out ways to help with that discomfort, something to make it more fun, to make the meetings more fun or more comfortable for him, or maybe just give him a little Scooby snack, a little treat after the meetings, just so he gets positive reinforcement for doing something that for a while may be mildly uncomfortable for him. I've been doing so many shows with Lusty Guy that I feel kind of lost with only my opinion. It seems to fall so flat without Lusty Guy to contradict me. But I hope that helps. And for our feedback section, I am sure you are not at all surprised to discover that we have even more feedback on asexuality. Big topic these days. A wrote in to say, I want to give you a big thank you for the mention of asexuality at the end of your episode, Striking While the Iron is Cold. Yes, this is an email from the back archives. And A writes, a very long letter I'm only going to read a small part of, giving a fantastic history of their entire sort of relationship with asexuality over their life. A writes, I recognize it's easier for me to pass as a normal heterosexual by not saying anything about my inherent difference compared to a homosexual, for instance, who would obviously be different because they seek to live in a way that is outwardly different from the norm. Regardless, this doesn't mean that I, or other asexuals, do not have a struggle. Many of us do want meaningful romantic relationships, but that's difficult because sex tends to invariably get in the way. So A writes about their entire life struggle with asexuality and what it was like in grade school and high school and college, and concludes, as an FYI, I identify as poly, and I used to identify merely as asexual, but bless the asexual community's heart, there are now even more terms to aid in my self-identification. I think heteroromantic gray A fits me better than simply asexual. Regardless, I'm definitely grateful to know there are others like myself and that you have shown a willingness to draw more attention to our plight existence. A, yes, indeed I have. And as I mentioned, we do have an asexuality expert coming on the show very soon. And Christina wrote in about the tendency in the poly community mentioned on episode 485 to mock those who are monogamous. And she writes, I'm one of the hosts of organized poly meetings in our city, Strasbourg, France. Hello, la France! We try to always start these meetings with an intro to introduce ourselves and the LGBTI center where the meeting takes place, explain the basic concept of polyamory to the newbies or polycurious persons present, and lay down a few rules to create a safe space and engage in a respectful group conversation. Now, we hosts all have our different way of explaining those things. In my case, there's a point when explaining the safe space guidelines that I like to add. She writes, we generally talk about banning any type of discrimination or judgment, but it seems understood that this is mainly directed to newcomers who don't know about these rules yet. In addition to that, I always take time to also remind poly people that this also applies to them towards monogamy. It's true that among poly people, we sometimes make jokes about monogamy, be it because some people actually have a problem with the concept, or to reassure ourselves when we feel oppressed because of our relationship model choices. Or, just because it's funny to remind ourselves that we used to think that way too, and that nobody's really ever right about anything, even when they want. I believe poly meetings open to polycurious people should take into account that there are some monogamous for now people there who took the courage to open their minds, question the way they live, and take that scary step of coming to learn more. There can also be some monogamous people whose long-term partner wants to explore poly and who come there to try to understand their wishes and seek reassurance because their situation seems very frightening to them. Making fun of or denigrating monogamy is thus very counterproductive in these support meetings, and I encourage poly people to try and be aware of that when they're not in strictly poly company. Poly meetings are one of the rare places where we can feel perfectly safe from judgment on the way we experience relationships, and it would be a shame if that was at the expense of all people present. Thank you for everything you're doing. And I wish to you, the people you love, and your listeners great relationship moments, be it poly or mono. Christina, thank you so much for writing in, and thank you for providing that model for event and meetup organizers everywhere. Yes, we should always talk about it being a safe space, and we should always talk about banning discrimination or judgment of anything within the community, that radical inclusion, as they say at Burning Man. It's time for your Happy Poly Moment of the Week, brought to you by Fubbly polyamorists everywhere.
Hey, Meeks, this is Greedy Paul calling from Southern California. I just wanted to call and give you a happy poly moment, well, sort of a happy poly moment. When I first started listening to you about a year ago, I heard multiple times you say that I should go in the path of greatest courage. And so I did. I started a poly group in my area, and I wanted to let you know that I have had about a dozen people reach out to me saying, hey, we were looking for this. We found you. So I wanted to share with you that it is succeeding. I am very, very happy that this is actually growing. There is a call for it out there. So thank you for directing me in the path of greatest courage. You have yourself a fantastic day. Scritches to the minx, and I love the podcast. Keep it up.
Congratulations, Greedy Paul, on taking the path of greatest courage and starting a local poly group. I apologize that you sent this email to me literally in 2013. It got so buried. So you're like 3 years into this by now. So a very belated congratulations and thank you for sharing. Also, Sean wrote in with the first happy poly moment he says he could send me. I've recently started dating someone and my wife is going out of town for a night. I'd been confused on when. It was a Thursday and I thought it was a Saturday. Once that was cleared up, I asked if my mistress could come over while she was out of town. Her response was, I'd be surprised if you didn't have her over. It just feels good to have my wife inviting someone over to her space. I'm hoping this is the start of my mistress coming over a lot and even with my wife there for a friendly evening. Happy dance! Well, Sean, I hope you enjoy your happy dance. That is a fabulous happy poly moment. Well, I think that about wraps it up for today's show. Questions, comments, feedback? Email polyweekly@gmail.com. Call 802-505-POLY. Or write us a review on iTunes. It's a great way to contribute to the show that helps people discover polyamory and helps them on their way to polyamory. The more reviews we get, the higher we get rated, the easier it is for people to discover our show. Well, thanks so much for listening, folks, and I think it's about time for me to say thanks. And remember, it's not all about the sex.